Hi, I'm Scientific Illustrator Stephanie Rozzo. Welcome to Nature Sketch Grace Go Out and Sketch an Axolotl instructional video. In this video, I'll be showing you how to sketch the axolotl by applying what you learned in your step-by-step lesson. You can follow along with this video even if you don't have the lesson kit. Help this tiny business by clicking that like button, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and shopping for crates at naturesketchcrate.com. First, make sure you have all the materials you need before you go out to sketch. You can go out to sketch at a zoo, aquarium, or even from an HD video at your home. Today, I'm sketching from a composite video of an axolotl for demonstrative purposes. Remember, this is just a sketch. It's meant to be relaxing and fun. Take your time observing nature, painting, and don't get too caught up with accuracy. So first, you want to determine what parts of the animal you want to draw, how big you want it to be on your page, and then use some light, rough lines to create kind of an outline sketch of the animal. And you can use simple shapes for this as well. So first, I'm going to draw a line from the tail tip through the body. And that's already a little bit over to the side, a little too much, but that's okay. And I'm going to draw the head about the right size for that shape that I just drew. So I'm going to be looking at this shape, the size of it, while I draw a rough circle for the head. Kind of an oval or almost even a square. So then I have that kind of mapped out, and then I'll start working on adding other things that help me figure out where the placement of other parts are going to be. So here I have a gill stalk. And that might be a little short, might be about right. I'll just leave that there, just in a light sketch. And there's another one right here that kind of goes this way. And the animal is moving just a tiny bit with the water in my video, the reference video. So it's not going to stay in exactly the same position. I'm just going to draw in some rough marks, so a little circle here. And then some lines for the toes or the fingers. And it's important to get these in quickly so that if you're out sketching the animal and it moves, you can still have the basic sketch to work from. So then you can add some details, like the finger details based on what you know about the animal already. Or you can even look at the animal and add those in later after it moved. So you just want to get the basic idea of what it looks like in this position, and then kind of work off of that. And it's just a sketch, so it doesn't need to be exact. We're just getting an approximate idea of this animal. And I'm using some slightly darker marks to indicate more final lines. And I'll base some of these other lines on these lines I've drawn. And this looks a little short to me, so I'm going to draw it a little longer. And I'm not going to erase lines. It makes it so that it takes more time if I erase. It can also ruin the watercolor paper, so it's better just to leave it as it is. You can use your kneaded eraser to lighten some marks if you need to, but for sketching an animal, it's better just to kind of leave them there and keep on going. Don't worry too much about getting the right number of ridges in this tail fin here, or the exact right shape. We're just getting an idea of the animal. This is going to be a rough sketch. It's not going to look exactly like it. And then you can start adding in a little bit of the face shape. So this kind of comes out here. So you can fix the face shape a little bit. Start adding in some details like the eye. So I'm going to draw a line from here to here, then kind of some lines here to give me an idea of where different parts of the face are. And I can just see that this is kind of a good place to relate it to, because there is a line there. Then the eye kind of falls in this basic area. We're going to draw a little circle for it. And again, this is a sketch. You don't have to get it exactly right. Just helps to relate it to different parts that you're drawing. Most important thing is to get an idea of this animal, a quick study for you to practice drawing and sketching. And since you already know this animal a little bit from our step-by-step, you can apply what you know. It's a little bit more familiar. It should be a little easier to draw than something you've never drawn before. And you don't need it to be exactly the right size, the right placement, just getting the idea of the animal on the page. And I changed the size of things by drawing some slightly darker marks. I didn't like how wide this was right here, so I just drew a darker mark, making it smaller. Again, not going to erase that. And then I look at what's the negative space here to kind of help me determine where and how long this gill is. And they're moving, so you can kind of do something similar. So, and then the eyes here, and there's a little toe sticking out, her finger right there, and then a gill peeking out there, and then there's another toe or finger. And then I can start adding details. So I can use even darker marks to add in the eye details. Anything I'm observing. And if you aren't able to get something quite right in the sketch itself, and you don't want to keep working on it or trying to make it right, maybe you're still needing some more practice drawing before you can get some sort of those details right, you can write on the white spaces little observations about it, pointing at different things to help yourself remember and learn. So say you notice something is a little bit too big or not quite the right spot, you can just note it. You don't have to fix it. Just note it on the side and then move on. I'm going to add in some more details. And for demonstrative purposes, I have the animal in a position in this video where it's not moving that much and it's not going to swim away or anything. But if you're painting it or drawing it in person, it's likely to do those things. But I want to make sure to demonstrate from a single position, since this is for beginners, how to draw something from start to finish. Drawing in a few of the filaments here just to get an idea of where they are, because I think when I paint the paint's going to determine a little more the placement of those filaments. So I'm just going to continue to add in these little details, but I'm not going to add too many details. I'm not going to work on it too long. Correcting that arch there a little bit. I think that was a little bit lower. And then I look at one thing to the next to try to figure out placement. So I'm looking at this and looking at the fin at the same time, and then I'm going to draw it in relation to the other. I'll look at this as a shape and think, does that look like the right shape? No, not exactly, but it's close enough. And put this area in here. I have this a little lower. Maybe the filaments are in a different position when I was drawing them, which is fine. So it's just a representation of the animal, not an exact copy. It's just a sketch, just to study, just to practice, for you to get to know the animal a little bit better. And to practice drawing, practice what you learned with your step-by-step. And here I'm adding in another finger, because I'm pretty sure one would be there unless this animal lost it. And I'll take one little look here. I forgot to add the filaments on this side. So add those in, mostly for direction, length. And I'll change those as needed later. And again, not worrying too much about getting the sizing of any of these things totally correct, just getting an idea of this animal here. I think that's a pretty good representation of this animal in this position. So I'm going to go ahead and write in the common name and scientific name. And I'm doing that for consistency and simplicity. Feel free again to write any kind of observations you're having about this animal, about how you're feeling, about this process, any questions you have, any thoughts. This is like your journal space. So make sure to treat it whatever way that you like. I'm going to erase some of these smudge marks. Probably should have had a piece of paper protecting my image. And then I'll go ahead and move on to adding some paint. So next I'm going to add paint, and I have my paints that I used for my step-by-step lesson already mixed, but if they're not vibrant enough, or if I run out, or if I need any other colors, I do have my other colors here with me as well. And I'll just revive these each time with a little bit of water. So if you have a cup you're getting your water from, add a little water to it, or you can revive them by just pressing a little bit on the barrel of your brush, releasing some of that water. And I'm going to start with the wettest, lightest Axolotl pink. So add a good amount of water to this, dab it off onto my towel, and test it out on my test paper. Looks a little bit too pigmented, so I want a little wetter, lighter. It's a little too dry or had too much pigment in it, so I want more water to paint pigment to make it appear lighter on my page, and that looks a bit better. I'm gonna pick that up. I'm not actually going to apply a lot of water to my page itself. I don't want my paper to buckle. It's a little too smooth for that kind of watercolor painting, so I'm gonna dab it off onto my towel and then go ahead and add it like I did in my step-by-step just over the entire thing except for the eyes. It's kind of dark and blue. If it ends up being a little too dark, you can always just spread that paint if that works, or dab it off onto your towel to get a little bit of that pigment off of your paintbrush. And if you end up painting in areas that you weren't meaning to add paint to, that's totally fine. And if it ends up outside of the lines you drew, that's fine as well. And it doesn't even need to fill in the spaces just exactly right. This is just a sketch. It's supposed to be a rough representation of this animal, just a quick study. So I'm gonna clean off my brush. This should dry fairly fast, but I do want it to dry before I add the next color. And it'll dry fast because I did not add that much water to the page itself. I'm going to test out this white color after I've revived it. I might want it just to be really very strong, so I'll add a little bit more to my palette. And be pretty liberal with that, just adding a bunch so I have some to use. And I just need to add enough water so that it moves kind of like a cream. I don't want it getting stuck, the pigment getting stuck on my paper, so it just needs a little bit of water there. And you can test that out there. That moves very nicely. And then I can just kind of dab over my painting to see if it's dry. If you move your finger across it, it might smear it, so you don't want to do that. It feels pretty dry, so I'm going to go ahead and pick some of that paint up, dab it off on my towel, so that I'm mostly doing pigment and not water. And since we didn't add a lot of water to it, when we're adding it, and I'm adding it pretty liberally to the paper, I'm not actually adding a lot of water to it. It's going to be mostly paint pigment, so it's not going to cause the paper to buckle. Unlike the color we added first, which we added a lot of water to it, and if we didn't dab it off onto our towel before applying, we would have added too much water to our paper. So here, adding a bit more loaded on my brush because it's paint pigment, not water. But I am dabbing it off a little bit so that I can control where that paint's going. I don't want to have too much on my brush. When you've added that, go ahead and clean off your brush, let this dry, and then move on to adding some more color. But you will want it to be dry first, unless you're wanting more of a kind of letting the paint blend together. So I add a little bit of color on my paper here and clean up my brush, and then add some of this other color in. You'll see it'll kind of start bleeding to the side. And if that's a look you want, that's something you can do while it's still wet. So let's see, it'll bleed a little bit. So it depends on the effect you're wanting to get. And I'm going to stick with the same thing we did with our step-by-step. So I'm gonna let this dry before adding more color. Since this is dry, just like with our step-by-step, move on to adding another layer of the pink. But this time it's gonna have a little bit more pigment to it. So I'm gonna pick up some of that pigment and add it to this, or it can revive this one on the side. It doesn't really matter. And test it out. See that it's a little bit darker or drier or more pigmented, has more paint pigment added to it. I'll test it out one more time. I think that's about the color I'm looking for. Pick up some more, dab it off onto my towel and add it in. And I'm just going to refer to my reference and kind of think about where I see that pigment. So kind of along the tail, down here, kind of these darker areas. And this is a little bit brighter than some of the animal we're referring to, but I'm not going to get too technical. Something that I can add on the side that's a little bit brighter pink. Once you've added all the color that you'd like to add, go ahead and revive your blue color, or mix the blue color. Pick a little bit of that up after cleaning up your brush, of course. Check it out on your test paper, see if it's the right color. And this color is just kind of on the outside of the eye. And I want to wait till this dries, unless again I want it to kind of bleed. This area is dry, so I can add it in there. But this area is a little bit wet still. I can feel it and even see it on my finger. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. So I'm going to wait for that to dry before adding that blue color. Now this area up here, the area I painted last, is still a little wet. This area here is dry, so I'm going to pick up a little bit of that paint, dab it off onto my towel, and then add it in. And I can see that there's a little bit of white space between the two, and I'll probably add in the dark area with our micron pen, so it makes it easy. I'm just going to outline the eye there a little bit. I'll clean off my brush, and then lastly, I'm going to revive my crimson color and add some more if I need it. I'm going to dab it off on my towel and check it out on my strip, this test paper here, just to make sure it still has its full vibrancy, and it looks like it really does. I'm going to put a little more water. I feel like it's moving well enough on the paper. It's getting a little stuck. Dab it off onto my towel, and I'll make sure not to put my hand in this area that's wet. And I'll start adding it to the gills. And I'll add it like I see in my reference. And so it stays a little bit lighter pink up here, so I'm going to leave that and kind of leave some lighter pink in between as well. But I'm not going to work on being too exact, just adding it in the same general space. And then most of these gill stalks are pretty light pink, so I think I'm gonna just add a few little lines and then add in most of those with the micron pens, leaving them a little pink there. And I'll redefine this with the micron lines as well, giving these a little bit more shape. I dab this off onto my towel. I'm gonna start in the middle on this one as well. That way I preserve this top part a little bit better. And make sure it stays pink. Add in all these little filaments. Again, the top ones have a lot of light, making them appear pinker, so I'm just going to add a couple little lines throughout, but then draw those in with a micron pen. And I think I like the way that looks. I'll let this dry and I'll move on to adding some ink lines. So now I'm going to add some ink lines, and I'm going to start with the smallest tip micron like we do with our step-by-step, the 005 or 005 micron. And I'm going to go ahead and just draw the lines throughout and then redraw my lines for my common name and scientific name, or if I had written anything in here I might want to go ahead and put that in ink as well. And I'll redefine them based on where the paint landed. So with these filaments on the gills, I'll just go ahead and draw around them to kind of create that kind of look of the filaments, kind of the shape. And I'll do the same thing in this pink area. So there's a little bit of red in between the filaments, but I didn't really paint in the filaments or even draw them in. So now I'm going to draw them in. And if you need to draw them in with pencil first, you can do that too. I'm just going to go ahead and add them in there. I'm not too worried about them being exact, since this is just a sketch. Something I didn't add in yet as well as are these little, I think they're veins in the gill stalks. A lot of this animal has a lot of transparency to it. I'm just going to add those kind of roughly in there. I'm not being exact about the placement again, just getting the same basic shape in there and similar placement. And there are some darker ones throughout here. This is the darker magenta, but I'm just going to add these in here. And then I kind of represented some of those there. And since it's just a sketch, I'm not going to add too much or worry too much about defining those a lot, unless that's something that you really want to show and talk about and highlight in your sketch, and you can spend more time on that. If you are drawn to any particular part of this animal and you want to explore it more by drawing more details, you should do that for sure. You can even blow up parts on the side, so make them larger. Say you want to look at the filaments and you can see them up close, you can draw a area here where it's blown up, or you can even draw a couple lines out and show the blown up area, maybe in a circle. So there are lots of options. Whatever you're most interested in is what you should be drawing. This is your exploration, your journal, your sketch. Next, I'm going to use the 01 micron just to add a few of those lighter but thicker lines anywhere I think might need a little bit more of a subtle line to it. So maybe like throughout some of these areas here between the filaments. maybe needs to have a little bit more defining. Maybe there's some dark areas. I need to see the difference between those filaments a little bit more. So right up against this gill stalk here seems like it might need a little bit of defining. Again, I'm not being too careful about that placement. I'm just kind of adding it in. And right here next, closer to the head, add a few in. And maybe between the feet, so between the toes, add a little bit of defining there. These toes in the back. And I think this all stays pretty light, maybe there. It's important when you're adding it in to keep it varied. You don't want to have the same line width around your entire image. It'll make it look flat. When you have the varied lines, it helps make it look like it's a little more three-dimensional and pop off the page, even though it's not. And you can go back and add these lines in at any time, and go back and add more of this marker, this pen, or the other ones. You don't have to do it all at once like I'm doing here. You can go back, do it again later. And I'm just going to also make the scientific name a little thicker here. Lastly, I'm going to use the 08 micron, the thickest micron, 08, and I'm going to go throughout and add these in. Anywhere I think has kind of a really deep line or a dark area. So one thing that's really obvious is right here under the head. It has a very thick, deep line. And then parts of this mouth, not the entire thing. I'm going to vary it a little bit. But the chin and the bottom of the head. And I'm going to be really careful not to run my hand over that until I know it's absolutely dry, which it does fast, but it can smudge. Be really careful about that. Anything that's shadowed or looks kind of heavy or needs to be come forward from everything else a little bit, stands out a little bit more. Or lines that you need to cover something up, or separate something. So between these two legs, see the separation, add a thicker line there to help those separate. Maybe a thicker line there to help the tail separate from the leg, and maybe outline this area to help these filaments separate from the legs and stand out, and here as well. And all this line variation, like I said before, will help the image to pop out a little bit more. So some parts that are a little lighter fade kind of into the background, and then the parts that are a little darker, have darker lines, thicker lines, will pop, and you'll see them a little bit more forward in the foreground. Lastly, I'm going to go ahead and add a little thicker line here, and then thicken the text of the common name. And don't forget to use the white space to talk about anything that you're thinking, your mood, the weather, any questions you have about this animal. This is your journal, so make sure to use the space and this time to make this your own. Now I'm done. Great job observing your world, and keep practicing. Thank you again for joining me. Make sure to use the hashtag #NatureCreateArt to have your art featured on our social media, and shop for future lesson crates at naturesketchcrate.com.